America's Fallen Cities, Atlantic City, by Alexander Lotmans, 1 year ago.
This is Atlantic City, a barren, creepy, and forgotten resort town on the Jersey Shore, dominated
Jersey.
by empty lots, surface parking, decrepit houses, and monstrous failing casinos. With occasional glimpses of better times, this city may be the most depressing in America, in a true
No way.
encapsulation of the postmodern world. Declining population.
The true depressing city. I mean, I've seen a lot of videos about like America's dying town and cities, and this one still seems kind of like, just from the bit we've seen, it still seems kind of, like there's still some modern looking aspect to it. I've seen videos about, some of the old mining towns and stuff like that, where, 80% of the population is gone, so it's like only a few people living in houses that are like very decrepit, and all of the houses around them are like literally falling apart. That's the true depressing town for me.
High crime and poverty define this former gem of the mid-Atlantic, a continued freefall from grace, because this was Atlantic City.
Are those old casinos?
A booming tourist town, Atlantic City was home to grand and glorious hotels, the most famous boardwalk in the world, popular beaches, high-profile events, and an impressive nightclub scene. The town's streets were lined with beautiful Americana architecture that was very charming, even for Americans back then, when every town was built classically. Simply put, Atlantic City was America's favorite getaway. Atlantic City had always been a resort town from when it was first established in the mid-19th century. It was meant to be an affordable option for Philadelphians to have a beach vacation, as tourism was growing in the US at the time, and urban residents wanted to escape the dense city to have an outdoor experience. A rail line was laid out in a straight line from Philadelphia to the South Jersey Shore, and there was Atlantic City. By the 1870s, rail was bringing in over 500,000 tourists to Atlantic City annually, with trains dropping off visitors next to luxurious hotels by the beach. It was also around this time that the boardwalk was built, in order to prevent as much sand as possible from being dragged into the hotels. This boardwalk wound up being a resounding success, and Atlantic City's popularity exploded.
Call me stupid, but this is the first time in my 27 years of life that I learned what a boardwalk is. Yeah, I didn't know until now.
With new train lines bringing in people from all over the country. As the decades continued and we approached the 1920s, large grandiose hotels lined the boardwalk, along with an array of small businesses and attractions. And the city was referred to as the nation's playground, and in some cases, the world's playground, which was only exacerbated by prohibition, as many of the back rooms of restaurants and nightclubs were known for illegal drinking. And in the off-season, Atlantic City was known for hosting big events such as Miss America and large conventions in Boardwalk Hall, one of the largest arenas in the country at the time, when it was built in 1929. The thriving community had theaters, prominent clubs, and sprawling piers.
Diving horses? What? High diving horses, Hawaiian high divers, Hollywood War Relic exhibit. Wait. Can horse dive? I never thought about it.
Clubs and sprawling piers, but the actual locals had a neat experience as well. Beautiful row houses on narrow roads with local shops and amenities in walking distance. And the main streets like Atlantic and Pacific Avenues were built up with beautiful churches and municipal buildings as good as anywhere else in the country at the time. Atlantic City is where saltwater taffy was invented and where Monopoly got all of its property names from. And so, where did it all go wrong? Well, it boils down to a few things. Firstly, amusement parks like Great Adventure, Disneyland, and Disney World started to become more popular for families for weekend and summer getaways, meaning places like Atlantic City were losing out. Also, cheap airfare had also become a thing, and so people, particularly Northeasterners, started to vacation in places much farther away from home, such as Europe, Florida, California, and Vegas.
Golden nuggets.
Additionally, once the car became the primary mode of travel rather than rail, Atlantic City had to adjust and hence raised many of its tight-knit blocks to make way for parking lots, which, as we discussed several times on this channel, seriously ruptures the vitality and enjoyability of places. But what the rise of individual car ownership and a rising middle class of the mid-20th century also meant was people's outdoor vacations were now in much more remote locations, perhaps in vacation homes or timeshares. On top of this, suburbanization also meant that many of the residents fled Atlantic City.
Is timeshare still a thing? I learned about it through a South Park episode. I think it's the ski episode where like it's a system where multiple people buy an house, I guess, and they're supposed to share it and, you know, schedule with each other when they can go on vacation in it or something, which sounds like a big pain and the kind of thing that would get people to fight, right? Is that still a concept?
For a larger house and a longer commute, meaning whatever wealth the casinos generated no longer trickled down to Atlantic City directly, but more so to the far out suburbs. All of this new competition meant Atlantic City had to expand beyond its original model. And so it went from being a beach resort town to a casino town, with gambling becoming the new bread and butter, taking a page out of the Las Vegas playbook, essentially trying to become the Vegas of the Northeast, and on the beach. Not a bad idea on the surface, but ultimately, it didn't work out. Atlantic City's beautiful ornate hotels made way for ultra-modern casinos with no redeeming aesthetic qualities, shifting Atlantic City from a picturesque beach town to, well, Vegas with water. And while this was sort of the goal, as I had mentioned, I think it's fair to say that it went down that route far too literally. These buildings were obnoxiously out of place and made the town feel eerie, and the disrespect these developments had on Atlantic City's cultural heritage doesn't take a history buff to notice and be repulsed by. It looks and feels forced and inauthentic. Simply a lesser version of what already exists.
Yeah, but do you think people coming to gamble all their money do really care about, like, you know, the aesthetic of the place? I don't know.
Elsewhere. To be fair, there was a bounce back period in the 80s when Atlantic City initially went down this gambling direction. But as Vegas only grew exponentially in popularity and gambling became legal throughout the country, Atlantic City missed out once again.
And the casinos have largely now failed.
And now, rather than having a city that, yes, is a shell of its former self, but at the very least retains the charm and aesthetic of what once was, giving hope for a possible return to glory or at least some rejuvenated spirit, instead you have a city a shell of its former self that's more than half empty, and with dystopian-like skyscrapers dotted around where great buildings once stood. It's severely underappreciated in America just how insane and dramatic this is. This is how Atlantic City has transformed over the years.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Like, it's one of the things where, like, it's like that in many cities in the world, right? Modern building, in general, look kind of terrible compared to the old one. And I'm saying that without nostalgia since, you know, I'm 27, like, I'm not 80 years old or something, but come on. Probably because this was so much more expensive to build, this kind of like ultra detailed building like this, rather than just doing like a fucking square skyscraper. You know. Money, money, money. There might be more reason to it.
Perhaps Atlantic City, with rising competition, had no hope in maintaining its previous
15
high
years
status.
back,
But
the casinos, only 18 and at pizza for dinner. That's nice.
in trying to
That's
cling
nice.
on to changing demands, it wound up shooting itself in the foot time and time again, raising its beautiful streets and hotels, building ugly with no regard for the town's history or previous redeeming qualities.
Every time I see any of this, like, all I can think is the Tour Montparnasse in Paris, right? The one ugly ass skyscraper, right? And everybody hated it so much that it is literally the only one.
Simply transforming Atlantic City from the seaside playground that America had fallen in love with to towering gambling dens had put the nail in the coffin, rather than adapt and progress the city as was hoped. We've discussed on this channel before how many great cities and towns have also had to adapt and take on a new life as decades, generations, and centuries have gone by, but that in doing so, their beauty, heritage, and aesthetic culture were maintained, and if not, were enhanced, but in a way that carried on the previously laid out building traditions. This can refer to Venice no longer being a financial hub, but still a thriving tourist destination, London rebuilding itself after the Great.
But Venice is in big trouble because of the rising tide. I saw a video about it once, and man, it's kind of scary that Venice might go under the sea eventually.
Fire, Haussmann building the great boulevards of Paris, or San Francisco moving away from shipping and into technology. But this list can go on and on and on. But rather than adapt and enhance, Atlantic City destroyed and abandoned. That's the core of the issue here. I think ironically that had Atlantic City hadn't changed anything, maintained its historical hotel buildings and neighborhoods, its family-friendly environment, and even so far as a strong rail system to bring people in and out of the place, that it would be extremely successful in the present day as both a beach destination for Philadelphians and as a rare slice of the classic Americana experience for people to enjoy. As someone that spent much time in Santa Cruz, California, a touristy beach town with an iconic boardwalk and a fair amount of historical and classically styled buildings, I have seen firsthand that this demand is there. Just look at this hotel that's being built there, for example. Beautiful, in an authentic classical style that is home in California. While it's always easier to say these things in hindsight, I'm also not necessarily blaming Atlantic City. It went through a period of decreasing popularity and simply looked towards the trends throughout the rest of the country and how to develop to try to fight back. We all know now, decades later, that these methods of prioritizing automobiles, destroying iconic buildings, and creating modernist and ugly places is just never going to be the answer. Nobody wants to hang out in a place that looks like this.
It looks like the apartment building I live in, basically.
Sadly, it's probably just too late for Atlantic City to ever bounce back now, but we can learn from this. Being distinctive is the key for placemaking because it creates character, identity, and something memorable. In bad times, cities with a rich history and culture should adapt, but never destroy or disregard what made them distinctive. And this, I think, applies to almost all cities and towns throughout the world, as modernism threatens to remove the distinctive culture and aesthetic of places wherever it touches. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
Fair enough.
And of course, a shout out to my master architect patrons.
I mean, I'm guessing there's a lot of cities like this in the world, you know, that are like shared lesson in how to modernize a city, you know, and in the end, the lesson is applied in other places. I guess, you know, you have to have the failures to have the success, to learn the lessons and make things work out, I guess. Okay. Well, good video.